Hello, everyone joining from all around the world. Welcome.
Hi, Emily. I got your
Hi.
WhatsApp. Thank you.
Oh, great. There's Chandra. Welcome, everyone.
Hi,
Thank you for
Kate.
joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As you enter, you can feel free to put your name, your organization, where you're coming to us from in the world into the chat box. I'm Emily Sullivan, and I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland with FP 2030. It's great to be with you today. Great, we have Ahmed from Egypt. We have Chandra coming from WHO in Geneva. I know we have Eric there from the Philippines, Yidnik from Ethiopia. Great. Wonderful, and as you welcome, we're looking forward to getting started, but in the meanwhile, please feel free to put your name and your country in the chat box. And actually, as we get started, we are going to actually have a poll while we get started, while we wait for everyone. This is the how to make bold and transformational commitments with and for adolescents and youth for FP 2030. And as we get started, while we continue to wait for people to join, we're going to have a sort of exciting question for you all to kick us off as we continue to wait for everyone to join. So the first question is, while we wait for others, that we're going to use this Menti poll. Use this link that I'm putting in the chat box now for everyone to answer the following question as we get started. Let's reflect. What do you wish that you knew about sex and relationships when you were an adolescent? Think back to your adolescence. Use the Menti poll that I just placed in the chat box. Here, I'll do it again, just in case you missed it. Use this Menti poll in the chat box to anonymously answer the question. And Sophie, my colleague's gonna pull up what the Menti poll results look like. But in the meanwhile, while you think about what you wish you knew when you were an adolescent, I'm actually going to ask Chandra to give his reflections. What do you wish you knew about sex and relationships when you were an adolescent, Chandra?
So a word of context. I grew up in India, in South India. I grew up in Bombay, actually. And I had loving parents, caring parents, a wonderfully safe family. And my parents did everything for us. What they didn't talk to us was about our bodies, about our sexuality. And for me, one memory that comes to mind is as an adolescent, I started having nocturnal emissions. And so these nocturnal emissions are ejaculations of semen onto your night clothes. And anybody who's had a nocturnal emission knows that once they get on the clothes, you can't wash them off. You wash them off and the clothes still looked starched. And I did everything I could to wash my clothes, wash my pajamas, avoid these nocturnal emissions. And I only wish I could have talked about it to my elder brother, who was 2 years older than me, or to my mother or my father. And my mother sorted out our clothes. For me, it was always a sense of, has she seen it today? What is she thinking of me? So those are recollections. I'm 62 years old now. So
And you
these are
still remember it like it was yesterday.
13, 14, 15.
Wow, you can always count on Chandra to really start us off on quite some strong footing. My guess is some of you have turned down the volume so people in your office or in your house maybe didn't hear that story. But I saw someone said that they wish they knew that sex was overrated. Other people said they wish they knew that it was normal. Some that said that I knew it wasn't taboo. Others wish that they knew about pleasure, that their choice matters. Things would have an impact on their future, on their life. So, this is important for us all to reflect on what we really wish we would have known as adolescents in our own lives. For all of us, it sometimes feels like a long time ago that we were an adolescent, and for others, it feels like just yesterday. As Chandra said, even if he is 62, he remembers like it was yesterday. I'll ask Nina Bina, what sort of stands out to you about these responses, Nina?
I think from these responses, you see people speak about things they wish they knew, is how you can get pregnant, which is a bit similar to me, and that sex is not a taboo, because that was always said. It's a choice, that sex is responsible, and being having sex and relationship is not all about emotional abuse and things like that. So they're quite familiar
They
answers
feel
to
familiar to you, to your own adolescence?
Yeah.
I think a lot of us thought we were alone in these things as adolescents, but now realizing they're all quite similar.
Yeah.
And I'm actually, now that we've gotten ourselves started off to an exciting start, reflecting on what we wish we knew about sex and relationships, I'm now going to introduce our co-hosts here for today's workshop. We you heard first from the ever excitable, ever talkative and inspiring Dr. Chandra Mouli, who is a scientist with the WHO. He's now, a big voice in the adolescent and youth field, but he actually spent his adolescence in southern India. He remembers actually getting into some fights with his uncle, who was quite a strong, stern man, but he also had loving teachers who helped to guide him towards his ultimate goal of becoming a doctor. So he remembers his adolescence quite fondly. For Nina Bina Devi, who is the youth focal point from Tanzania. Nina is a really diehard, amazing advocate in Tanzania, inspired by her own adolescence. She remembers quite a bit of spending time in boarding schools, making good friends, and she was always really curious. But she also struggled to find someone to talk to about, like, what is this menstrual cycle? What's happening in my body? And it was challenging for her being away from home and not knowing where to go. And then for Kate Lane is the director of Adolescents and Youth with FP 2030, and like Chandra has been working in this field for many, many years. But Kate spent her adolescence in Northern California in a small, safe town. She remembers riding her bike and having lots of freedom. She said she was quite nerdy, but she actually enjoyed being nerdy, and that was sort of her style. So these are our co-hosts for today. I would encourage you to write a little bit about your adolescence in the chat box as you reflect on what was it like for you to be an adolescent, and where did you spend your time and how did that feel? So we started off today's tone very much reflecting on the actual what has been like for what it's like to be a young person, to be an adolescent, reminding ourselves of what we wish we knew, how we spent our own adolescence. And today we're now going to shift to what's the purpose of this particular workshop. So first, I'm going to ask Kate. Kate, what do you view as the purpose of today? And what are we really hoping that participants get out of this workshop?
Oh, great. Thank you, Emily. And hello to everybody. I'm so glad you're here. Emily and I have been spending a lot of time putting together this workshop to make it entertaining, informative. The objective for us today is to really help you understand the guidance that we have developed for making an adolescent and youth commitment to FP 2030, and want to provide you with some very specific steps that you can take to make a really strong commitment that involves young people, is driven by data, and applies evidence-informed interventions.
Excellent. And for you, Nina, what are you really hoping that participants get out of this workshop by the end of today? These 2 hours we have.
Yeah, so Emily, I think out of this session today, I believe country commitment process committees and members and technical working groups will really understand all the know-hows of how to engage young people exclusively, engage them in the commitment making and understand their needs and be part of the commitment process, not just think of data and not really including young people's voices and preferences in the commitments as well.
So we're trying to change some hearts and minds here to those of you on the line who aren't sure about working with young people to develop your commitment. We're hoping by the end of today that you know a little bit more about how to do that and why to do that. How about for you, Chandra? What are you really hoping by the end of today people get out of this workshop?
Thank you, Emily. And it was interesting to listen to Nina and to Kate. So I want three things. I want participants to go away with the sense that this is a never before opportunity to invest in adolescent health with a particular focus on adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and within that on contraception. There's lots of funding opportunities, lots of programmatic opportunities that we need to grab. That's one. Second is, as we do that, and as we move from FP 2020 to FP 2030, as we move from a pre-COVID era to a COVID era, what are the mistakes we made that we can learn from? What are the good things we did that we can build upon? And thirdly, I want, if there's one thing I want to see differently, I want to see how young people can be used meaningfully in this process, in using this opportunity, in learning from the lessons learned, and moving away from tokenism to meaningful involvement of young people. And what does that mean in practical terms? I think nobody's opposed to that. I think to give people a practical sense of what are the three things I can do for meaningful engagement. Over to you, Emily.
Excellent. So we have a lot of aspirations for today. We're hoping that all of you, those sound like things that you're also hoping to get out of this workshop. And I love that someone, Lau Sally from UNFPA, is also talking about her adolescence in the chat box. For those of you who missed the introduction, we talked a little bit about what our adolescence was like and what we wished we'd known about sex and relationships. So I encourage you to reflect on that as we continue to go along. But that's the purpose for today, what we're really hoping. And let me just quickly walk you through how this is going to flow for today. So we want you by the end to understand the main recommendations that are in the guidance, which you will, if you haven't seen already, we'll be sure you get the link to that so you can have some of those real practical tips. We're doing the welcome and introductions. We're doing a root cause analysis rapidly. We're going to overview the guidance, and then we're going to do some breakouts. So that's how today's going to flow. So far, we've talked about our own adolescence, what we wish we would have known about sex. We're now thinking about the purpose of today and how we can start to really think about adolescents' lives in our own countries. So something we've realized is that a root cause analysis, many of you have done this before. We're going to attempt to do it rapidly, because one thing that we all know is that that sometimes the why of adolescence and why we're focusing on adolescence is a little unclear. Kate, do you want to give a little bit more background on why you think that this, why focusing on the why of early pregnancy is really important?
Sure. So I've worked in the adolescent health field for many, many years and have worked with a number of you on the call today. And one of the things we often do is we start with sort of a superficial understanding of what young people need, and oftentimes that's information. And what we don't always take into account is that there are lots of challenges that young people face to accessing and applying information. And if we don't really dig down into some of those root causes, like social norms that prevent us from talking to young people about sexuality, as we saw in the poll earlier this morning, or earlier in the session, we're not going to be able to tackle these issues effectively. So we really want people to be cognizant of some of the things that drive young people, the challenges and the barriers, as well as the opportunities that young people might have to obtain high quality sexual and reproductive health information and services. And if you don't have that understanding, then you're sometimes sort of doomed to repeat failure.
Exactly. And so we're going to walk through, Nina and I are going to lead you all through a why, rapid root cause analysis now. And so we're going to again use that same Menti polling. I just put the link in the chat again. And so the question here that we want you all to reflect on is the, one moment, while I click on the other tabs, I think, Sophie.
Sorry, it's stuck for a second. Give me one.
Okay, so what we're gonna have you all reflect on in the why is in the reflecting on why is early pregnancy so common. So why do you think early pregnancy is so common? Use that same link, and this is the code there, and put in your answers to this question. Why is early pregnancy so common? Let's see what happens here. And Nina's gonna maybe reflect a little bit on it as we go.
Yeah.
Maybe Nina, you can even.
What's the code again? Sorry.
The code there is 79043825.
So I'm seeing lack of information, lack of contraception, lack of awareness, early child marriage culture, stigma, this lack of access to family planning, and this lack of info and misinformation. So there's lack of information.
That seems to be remaining central. Some of the other some of the other big ones look like poor education, poverty, ignorance, but yeah, that lack of information is remaining center and quite large.
Yeah. There's also sexist taboo being a bit big as well, and yeah.
So Nina, I think we all can see that lack of information is remaining central there. So now we did one why. Let's do the second why. The second why, so stay on that same page there, and we're going to go to the second why. So now that we have lack of information as the first why, the second is, why is there a lack of information? Why is there a lack of information? Let's dig into that second why, that second root cause, taboo.
So I just put it on the chat, the second why. So why is there lack of information? And I'm seeing taboo. I'm seeing taboo everywhere. I'm seeing absence of comprehensive sexuality education. I'm seeing policy. Taboo is still big, and I'm seeing shame of asking, traditional norms, bias, comprehensive sexuality education not being fully implemented. And I'm also saying religious reasons, but as well, taboo is still at the center and still weak. Embarrassment, inappropriate to discuss, and shame. So they all line up to a bigger one, which is taboo. I'm saying stigma is bigger one, no CSE, religion, and social norms.
I mean, so we've got a lot there, but again, like the previous one, the first why, which in case you missed it, our first why was, we said, why was early pregnancy so common? And there was agreement that mostly that's because of a lack of information. Now we've asked, why was there a lack of information? And we've got clearly here a front winner, which is taboo. So now we're going to do the third why. The third why is, why is there a taboo? Why is there a taboo that's making a lack of information that's also causing early pregnancy? So now we're on our third why. This last why is there a taboo?
So with why is there a taboo? So there's religion, there's embarrassed, there's no youth engagement, there is culture, and same as religion, but written as religion, barriers, and misinformation and fundamentalism, and as well as patriarchy, and women don't have power. And I'm seeing tradition as well again, but the bigger ones are culture, religion,
social norms, social norms there.
Yeah. And there is family and culture as well in it, and need to control by the elders, which is in another culture as well. So yeah, so those ones I'm saying. And again, now I feel like there's two big ones, Emily. There's culture and religion. So probably take some more to see if one of them gets smaller or gets bigger. Yeah.
Wow, so we've done these three whys, and it seems like, although there's some differences, that in general, when we asked why was there early pregnancy, mostly people said lack of information. We said why there was a lack of information, people said taboo. And when we said why is there a taboo, you all seem to be saying a combination of culture, religion, norms, conservatism. What are some of your takeaways from this, Kate?
Well, so we as a field, and Chandra and I are about the same age, and the world has been kind of looking at adolescent health for about 25 years, and I think we haven't necessarily done a very good job of looking at some of these root causes, which really impinge upon our ability to provide information to young people. And if you don't really take the issues of culture, religion, and sort of conservatism into consideration, it's going to really cripple your efforts to provide young people with information, and then going on to looking at services. So I think we're really trying to give here is, yes, young people need information, but we have to frame access to information within the context of these different challenges and keep those things in mind and find ways to engage those players as well. Not blocking our engaging them.
Looking at those root causes. How about you, Chandra? What are your takeaways from this? You're muted, my friend.
Kate is right. We need sound understanding of the reality of adolescents in the context of their families, communities, countries. But for me, this morning, I did a webinar with Moldova. It was a major event there. They had 250 participants. celebrating an important milestone in their youth-friendly health services journey. Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. Many Moldovans are working in menial jobs in Western Europe, even if they are trained psychologists, anthropologists, etc., etc. And Moldova also faces many of the problems. You know, this CSC is not allowed because of opposition. So culture, religion, patriarchy, economic constraints. But Moldova has put in place a program to improve contraceptive use by adolescents. It has succeeded in reducing mental health problems in adolescents and in improving contraceptive uptake and reducing adolescent childbearing. So my point is, yes, we need to understand, and yes, this is very complicated, but that does not need to stop us from doing things. And
Right.
Moldova is not the only country. I can give you Ethiopia, Chile. And I think the point is, we need to understand this, but this should not be the end of the discussion. It shouldn't be as if we can only work with adolescents and meet their needs after we overcome patriarchy, because patriarchy may be around for a long time to come.
Right. So not to be overwhelmed by these results, but rather in knowing that countries like Moldova and others in Chile and Ethiopia and others have started to tackle these things.
I want to add one other thing. We had a great session last year in Senegal with a colleague from UNESCO that works on the intellectual guidelines and comprehensive sexuality education. And the point there is just to anticipate that you might face challenges and to have plans to address those challenges. And like Chandra said, we can overcome those challenges, but you need to anticipate and have a plan for them.
Right. Nina, any reflections from you on this sort of root cause analysis? Chandra's reminding us to not be overwhelmed by this map that's in front of us, but rather to be inspired to know that there are ways to tackle these things to make sure that adolescents can have access to services and make a brighter future for young people.
So I think it's important to right. So can you hear me? Because it's my internet
we can hear you.
Acting up. Right. Great. So saying I think it's important to have such a method, or you would say a tool, really understand the root cause of, adolescents and young people's issues, and just using the same as this one, like why, would really help, especially during the commitment process time, to really understand, get into the root of things that probably you just go through a data that you have in your office, or you just use, you have like at the moment, but rather when you dig deep and understand, it could change a slight of a sentence that would completely change the meaning of the commitment itself. So I think it's really important that we did it, and I'm recommending it to all the countries visit, just to understand the root of everything that they're going to represent. Back to you, Emily.
That sounds great, Nina. So we're encouraging everyone, if you haven't already, to do a similar exercise. Like Nina was saying, she's hoping to do this with her colleagues in Tanzania to make sure they're not just using data that's on hand, but digging deeper to see the root cause, and then inspired by what Chandra said to not then get overwhelmed, but rather say, okay, what practically can we do about this? So speaking of getting practical, now we've thought about our own adolescence. We reflected on what we wished we'd known when we were adolescents about sex and relationships. We've talked about, the root causes, what is really behind adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and what makes it really challenging to work on. So now we are going to dig in a little bit to the guidance that FP 2030, with the support of many young people, as well as experts like Chandra as well, have informed this guidance. In case you missed it, this is the website right there, and this is what the beautiful layout looks like, and the website. So if you've missed it, do check it out. It has some very practical tips on, for example, making seats for multiple youth-led organizations in your technical working group or your country engagement working group. Amelia's just put it in the chat box as well. Kate's going to give you a high-level overview of what this guidance looks like so that you get a flavor for it. And then we're going to move into a discussion and then breakouts. So Kate, take it away and let us know what is in this guidance as a sort of a, we're going to try to whet your appetite, make you interested in actually digging into the guidance itself. So go ahead, Kate.
Sure. So as I referenced earlier, ICPD in 1994 was when we really began to talk about adolescence on a global stage. So it's been almost 26 years since, or more than 26 years since ICPD. And that's where we really first started talking about the sexual and reproductive health needs of young people. And so now here we are in 2021, and it's really time that countries start to put forward approaches that result in significant improvements in the well-being of young people. We need to capitalize on sustaining the gains that we've made in early childhood, and we need to help countries lay a foundation for a pathway to healthy adulthood. Young people sit at this nexus between the gains that we made and the gains that we want to continue to make as populations age. So we're really encouraging countries to be bold and visionary in their commitments to young people and really look for ways to transform the lives of millions of young people whose lives may be interrupted or even ended by unintended pregnancy. You can go to the next slide, Sophie. So commitments to FP 2030 can help to knit together the various factors that influence adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and presenting a comprehensive vision and proposing mutually reinforcing strategies that can tackle the complexity of adolescent sexual and reproductive health and early childbearing, and help to move countries toward the implementation of programs at scale. And I think we saw from the word cloud and the root cause analysis that adolescent pregnancy is a complex issue, not going to be solved simply by providing information to young people, given the challenges that young people will have around obtaining quality information. You know, young people do have access to information. One of the things I was going to say about my own childhood or my own adolescence is, you know, sex sells, right? People use sex all the time. You see it in the media, you hear it in the music, and yet we don't talk to young people about it in an informative, supportive, non-stigmatizing way. And it's simply not enough anymore to implement boutique approaches or interventions that may feel like the right approach, but demonstrate little or no impact. One way to do this is to consider how we can make health systems more responsive to adolescents, especially since young people may obtain other services before they seek sexual and reproductive health care. And a more systems-focused approach can help to institutionalize services for young people that don't end when donor funding ends, and contribute to implementation at scale, not just in specific districts or regions. Next slide. So what should an AY commitment, a commitment to adolescents and youth, attempt to address? In general, a commitment to adolescents and youth will ensure that young people have information about sexual and reproductive health and rights that responds to their specific needs and their preferences. Many of us wish we'd had more access to non-biased, non-judgmental, evidence-based information about sexuality and relationships that would have helped us to normalize our experiences. Many of us, again, live in societies where sex is used to sell commodities and goods, and relationships are discussed in songs, media, and the internet. School-based comprehensive sexuality is important, but there are lots of other ways to ensure young people have good information through mass media, through more work with faith institutions, and more work with parents. Those are a few that come to mind. But as I've said earlier, and I will say this repeatedly to the day I die, information is not enough. For example, HIV programs have found that young people have high levels of knowledge about HIV and HIV prevention, but that knowledge simply does not translate into action. And one of the things we can do is to do more to help young people develop skills and the confidence to apply the knowledge. And once young people are prepared to act, services must be available and they should be supportive. They need to be non-judgmental, intentional, and easy to obtain. It's not enough to just simply ensure youth-friendly services are available upon request. What are some of the things we can do to more intentionally and actively provide quality services to young people instead of just waiting passively for them to request services, given all the barriers that young people describe to obtaining care? Next slide. So we've talked a little bit about the why of making a bold and transformative and intentional commitment to young people. So let's talk about a little bit about what's going to make up a good commitment. There are lots of resources that have been generated over the years that can help you make a quality and actionable commitment to young people, from improved access to data to an international guidance from WHO that helps you determine the best approach for the population you want to reach. A couple of points to keep in mind as you work to develop your adolescent commitment include things like working with young people. And we are intentionally using the word partnership because we want partnership to go beyond just engaging young people as beneficiaries of program to adopting more equitable approaches and collective problem solving in partnership with young people. The guidance provides very specific tips on how to work in partnership with young people. And Emily referenced one of those earlier, like, for example, making a couple of seats available on technical working groups for youth-led organizations. Here's some other things to keep in mind. Young people are often quite willing and quite prepared to work with adults. Adults, on the other hand, aren't always as prepared to work with young people. So one of the things we can do is train adults on how to work respectfully and equitably with young people. Again, creating some seats for young people in youth-led organizations on family planning technical working groups, which exist in many countries. One thing that's really important is working with young people to select their own representatives to such groups, rather than adults identifying young people that they'd like to work with, and trying to be more inclusive and diverse in engaging different subgroups of young people, such as adolescents with disabilities or young people from rural communities or urban slums, and provide opportunities to build young people's skills so that they can participate on an equal footing. We need to do a better job of using the available data that's available to us effectively and responding to what the data tells us. And by data, I mean both quantitative as well as qualitative. And considering those root causes, which we talked about earlier, around the select data points, such as these pervasive sociocultural norms, early marriage, or gender norms that prevent girls from speaking up, or even ageism that devalues the perspectives of young people. We need to not applying a one-size-fits-all approach for adolescents. For example, school-based comprehensive sexuality education is great in countries where there are lots of young people enrolled in school, may not necessarily be the best option where young people are not in school. Or youth corners, which is also a popular approach, may not work in rural areas where health facilities are small and understaffed. Finally, I think personally, it's time for us to really begin to operationalize a multi-sectoral approach. And many of the factors that lead to early childbearing occur outside the health system, such as the fact that girls marry early or that young people are not in school. The health sector needs to continue to do more to improve the quality of care that's provided to young people, and the health sector needs to focus on what it does while seeking to partner with other sectors that work with young people to try and create a stronger system of youth development that considers the needs and preferences of the entire young person and the influence of things like education, employment, and civic participation. Next slide. So let's roll these concepts up into 3 priority strategies that countries to implement to generate strong commitments. Again, partnership with young people is essential. 25 years after ICPD, young people are better prepared than ever before to work with governments and civil society to express their needs, to identify their preferences, and to generate solutions. Partnership with young people can help to contextualize the types of interventions we should implement and also reveal some unforeseen challenges or opportunities that we as adults may not have identified. Step 2 is to use and cross-reference available data, both quantitative and qualitative, using multiple sources to paint a more in-depth picture of young people in your country, going beyond the individual to consider the influence of partners, families, peers, communities, and national policies. One challenge that we have persistently experienced is the lack of age disaggregated data that allows us to generate this more in-depth picture of young people. And one thing you may want to consider in your commitment is looking for ways to generate this more age-specific data that can help us to implement and measure interventions more effectively. Working with young people, again, in partnership to review and analyze data may also help to generate new insights and solutions that we might have overlooked. We've not yet found an intervention that can address all the concerns of young people, but we can do a better job of identifying vulnerable populations and matching the right intervention to their needs. For example, married adolescents have been widely overlooked despite the fact that most childbearing continues to occur in marriage, and married adolescents often experience rapid repeat pregnancy because they're not approached with family planning services after delivering that first child. So in countries where rates of early marriage are high, an appropriate intervention package might be to try to reduce early marriage rates, provide improved ANC and postpartum care to married adolescents, including postpartum family planning, while also expanding access to sexuality education and youth-friendly services for young people who are in schools. So overall, interventions should attempt to support young people to make healthy choices and decisions, facilitate their ability to obtain and use contraception, and address the enabling environment in the context of the socio-ecological model that is promoted by WHO. Next slide. So commitments, to go back to this point of the socio-ecological model, we want commitments to go beyond supply and demand to really acknowledge the influence of the enabling environment. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, enabling environment is a set of interrelated legal, political, social, and cultural issues. And working with young people and consulting with young people and soliciting their inputs will help us better understand how well we're currently engaging young people, how well policies are being implemented, the effect of these sociocultural norms on the experience and choices of young people, how well we're coordinating and collaborating with other sectors, and also helping us to understand the needs of very highly vulnerable young people, such as displaced young people who are disabled, or young people who are in crisis. And then the next slide. And just to remind you, we have, we have lots of resources. We have the guidance, which has been shared in the chat box. There's also some great new resources that are available. There's a new high impact practice enhancement on adolescent responsive contraceptive services. WHO has just put out a data sheets on various countries that provide you with a wonderful data summary. And we will soon be launching an adolescent and youth data app. I think that's pending in the next couple of days, and we will certainly let you know as soon as that's available. Couple of other things that you might find useful: the International Youth Alliance of Family Planning has put out a meaningful adolescent and youth engagement checklist to help you determine how well you're engaging young people in your country in the development of commitments and the implementation of programs. And then the Population Reference Bureau has a great tool on youth and family planning policies that really that score countries on the availability of policies, which of course really contribute to your enabling environment. So we hope you will make use of these resources as you go forward to developing your bold and transformative commitment to young people in your country. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Kate. So I think that, we've referenced our own adolescence, what we wish we knew. We did a root cause analysis on the why. We've now looked more at what the guidance and recommendations are around this. For the 80 or so people we have on the line who are maybe feeling a little bit dizzy, and they're like, okay, we've got all these root issues which are really challenging. We remember how difficult it was for ourselves as an adolescent. Maybe some of you have young people in your houses, either your children or your nieces or your nephews, or you yourself are a young person. You want to make this commitment process better than it's been before, address young people's needs in a way that makes a real difference. What before we move into the breakout sessions where we are all going to be practicing some of our possible ways of improving commitments, we want to leave people with some real takeaways and really guiding them a bit on what they feel after this presentation and reflecting on what they can do as all these 80 or so people on the line are beginning to chart their way forward on this. What do we really want them to focus on and not lose sight of in the next couple of months to year while they begin to really dig into these commitments, dig into them more deeply, like Nina was saying, and hoping for better. Chandra, what would you say you'd really want them to really dig in on and focus on more than some other things, perhaps?
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Kate. That was a great overview. And I know how much time and effort you, Emily, and the rest of the team have worked on, and how many versions of this document on commitment. So I know enormous amount of time, effort, a labor of love. So for me, three messages. One is that although we are talking about adolescents, we have to think about adolescents not as one group, but a very diverse group. And that's very important. Married adolescents and unmarried adolescents, for example. Kate mentioned the data sheets from WHO. The levels of contraceptive use in married and unmarried adolescents are very different. Take, for example, Tanzania, very different levels of use. The types of contraceptives they use are different. Where they get contraceptives are different. The barriers for use and reasons for use are different. Although they are Tanzanians living in one place, they're like almost two different species in terms of their use. And that is true for everyone else. Constantly think of yourself. When I was 16, I met the girl who then became my wife later. We started to have sex, and I would go very far from my house to get condoms, a place where I knew my mother would never go to. And remember, that's after we were married. My wife got contraceptives from a pharmacy without any problems, but we were the same people, but in a very different stage in our lives. So that's one. And you don't need to meet the needs of all the adolescents. Begin with something, and that's where the data is important. The second thing is to just make it simple without making it too simplistic. Just think of it in this way. Some adolescents, if you make contraceptives available to them, they can obtain them and use them. They have the power, they have the knowledge, they have the understanding. Not all adolescents are disempowered, not all adolescents are powerless. Many have the power. So think of that. So for the adolescents who have the power to obtain services, we can make services friendly, and we can make sure that providers are not biased and know how to provide the right contraceptives in the right way. But for other adolescents who don't have the power to decide, whose husbands or sisters-in-law or mothers-in-law decide, who are very scared about contraception, who, like in India, where I come from, if a woman who's married does not produce a child in a year, is under huge social pressure, then we need to address those factors as well. So just think of it. The first point was two different groups. Second is the two different lines of work. And the third point is, just because you write a good commitment, money is not going to flow into your table from Melinda Gates. I promise you that. But on the other hand, we can help you tap into USAID, DFID, the Dutch government, and if a good, well-conceived investment, and our support to you is not just in writing it, but in getting the funds, and we have a huge grant from Gates Foundation to support you in translating that into action. Kate will talk about that at the end of the session. So those are my three takeaways. Not a single group. There are broad lines of work that you can already start focusing on. And thirdly, think about how best to do this so that we can attract different donors to support this work. My last point, I know the fourth point is, even in a country like Switzerland where I live, you don't have separate services for adolescents everywhere. They may have a few places, but in most places, the services are integrated into existing clinics by existing providers. That's true in Sweden, that's true in the UK. You might have a few separate clinics, but across the country, you don't have separate clinics. Even rich countries can't afford them. And certainly India and Uganda and Bolivia can't afford them. Over to you, Emily.
That's great, Chandra. So there's a lot there that Chandra was emphasizing, but I think overall, usually Chandra's messages, please don't be too overwhelmed. Please really make sure that you lean on the resources and the availability of the technical assistance mechanism and other things. Nina, did you want to give your one kind of message on after these sort of big discussions, what you want to make sure as we move into the breakouts that people think about, put their minds to in their commitment process?
Sure. You can, I bet Chandra has said mostly what I wanted also to say, but again, I think I'll be emphasizing this for the third time in the same Zoom call, but it's important that I say it again, that understanding that we have data, correct, we have tools and technical guidance to help us out, but if the involvement and understanding of exactly what young people want, if they're not part of it, it won't be exactly as how it's supposed to be. Take an example of when a bunch of people sat down and said, you know what, let's have youth clinics. None of a young person was there when they were deciding that, because we don't go to such youth clinics. It's like going to a place where everybody would see. So even though we have the technical team, and we have the technical guidance, we have the data, if young people are not involved in these discussions, and by involving, I don't just mean being there and we've signed that a young person 2 or 3 are part of it. No, I mean, they take part, they tell you the data that is real in the society right now. Because, for example, you'd say, oh, young people like to use condom, but what if, at that particular society, young people would prefer a different method instead. So maybe that will be my one takeaway, that inclusion, participation, preferences of young people should be considered at most when it comes to such commitments. I would say. Thank you, Emily.
Like you said, Nina, because then you might be at risk of making big investments in things that young people could spend 2 minutes telling you that wouldn't work. So that's that's the risk there, is making big investments and big policy advocacy for things that may would never quite work in the first place. We have time for some questions before we go into the chat box, or sorry, before we go into breakouts. Quite a few of the questions are referencing, practically really integrating information and services pieces together. In the why exercise, we saw that a lot of people first thought of lack of information when they thought of why adolescents, there's a lot of early pregnancy. But others are wanting to know a bit more about the practical ways of integrating information and services together to make sure that you're not emphasizing, as Kate said, yes, young people need more information, but they also need access to services. So perhaps, I don't know if Kate, you'd like to take that, or Chandra or Nina.
I'm sorry, Emily, can you say it again?
Sure. So what was being referenced at the beginning was that there was a lot of discussion around that information is not enough. And someone in the chat box, Sally from Lao, is asking us that,
Okay.
you know, in acknowledging that information is simply not enough. That has come out a few times so far in our discussion today, that talking more specifically about integrating information and services together is going to be key. So any thoughts on that?
Can I come in quickly,
Okay, go
Emily?
ahead, Jonathan.
There's a comment from Arzo Garg about, and a valid comment about, can we start from committing to interventions to reduce the stigma around AYSRH in India? So that's one comment. And then there was a comment by Patience Mugoli Mwale on ecosystems for adolescents and youth, how to strengthen ecosystems in the context of developing countries like India. We're talking about sexual and reproductive health is stigmatized by society. So just a quick comment on that. You know, I grew up in India. You know, in my highly educated household, where my mother was 91, is a graduate, she was not allowed in the kitchen when she had her periods. It's very, very common in many families in India. So a lot of stigma growing up with it. And I talked to you about my personal experience. But there are many aspects of AYSRH which are not stigmatized in India. For example, contraception in young married couples. You can actually start with discussion on contraception in young married couples, particularly after the first child is born. There's a big campaign now with Gates Foundation support in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Kate and I have contributed to that. There's no stigma there. It's a question of social norms about childbearing. And increasingly, there are programs to address slightly delaying childbearing within marriage. We don't need to start with the most difficult issues. We can start with the non-controversial issues. And many young people who are unmarried are already obtaining contraceptives, including emergency contraception and medical abortion from pharmacies. Let's work there. Let's not try to take the most difficult challenge to start with.
So that's a message from Chanjan. I know Yasmin from Pakistan also asked about that specifically in the Pakistani context of practical ways of working with married young people with premarital counseling. And so that might be an easier place to start for those of you who are struggling to work with unmarried young people or other areas.
That's
We'll
actually an
be happy to
innovation.
share experience from the Challenge Initiative on that in India.
And I think that
Please do mute yourselves. Thank you.
premarital counseling programs have been implemented in a number of countries. I'm thinking of Egypt, Northern Nigeria, and those can certainly help. As long as they're, as long as the counseling is not prescriptive, but allows young people to actually engage in dialogue and discuss the benefits of, using contraception either to delay the first pregnancy or to ensure that the second one is adequately spaced. So those types of interventions are available.
There's a question from Patience. Sorry, Patience, I assigned your comment to Arzu. Your comment was about making time available for counseling, and you're absolutely right. Many times adolescents are coming with questions, they want advice, and in this whole world of myths and misinformation and fake news, they really want information. Many adolescents are frightened when we use the term long-term contraception, because they're very worried about what does that mean if I want to get pregnant again. And I think health workers have a very important role in talking to, understanding, not sitting there and scolding them or giving information. Like Kate said, do a root cause analysis even at the individual level to understand why they're thinking and how can we respond to that. Again, we have training tools that we can make available to you, digital training tools.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes young people will come in for services. They won't necessarily come in requesting sexual and reproductive health services. They may come in for something else to kind of test the friendliness of the provider before they begin to disclose other issues, because we know there's a lot of stigma around accessing sexual and reproductive health services in general. I did some work in a country a number of years ago where young people would come in for dental services, and when they were in the chair getting their teeth cleaned, then they would be asking the dental nurse lots of questions about relationships and sex. And here's an untapped opportunity where young people are actually coming to services with no need to go out and generate demand or try to convince young people to come into a specialized clinic. They were accessing the services, and the dental nurses unfortunately simply weren't prepared. So, you know, the Challenge Initiative has done a lot of work around trying to do a whole of clinic approach where everybody in the facility is prepared to respond to the needs of. If we vest services only with one or two providers, then we're missing an opportunity to see young people when they access other services besides just family planning services.
Right, and I think for our last point, oh, go ahead, Nina.
Yeah, Emily, I just saw a question from Teresa who asked how to engage adolescents and youth who are mostly unorganized. And the answer is very clear, just work with them. You know, when you talk to them, you'll understand how to work with them. When you sit in an office and imagine, maybe they have to be organized in terms of an organization or an initiative or of young people. And in most cases, it won't be possible to work with them. But get in contact, like how you get to send an email or get to a youth-led organization and work with them, participate, and understand how they work as young people. And that way you can be able to work with adolescents and youth. So it's not only let them come in to participate in, you know, discussions and stuff, but work with them to understand how they work with other young people and how do young people work with young people as well. So thank you.
Young people do organize in lots of different ways. You know, there's clubs, there's student organizations. One of the things we've been pondering within our own organizations, how do we work with like medical students, for example, you know, that are organized, and how could we do a better job of reaching medical students with, you know, training and support to be better prepared to in their communities or in their practices. But one of the things that we recommend in the guidance is to go out and do a mapping of youth organizations in your country, and that can help you identify, even though young people may not organize into large groups, there are lots of different organizations that are run by young people that if you go out and do, you know, more of a mapping exercise and maybe looking outside the health sector. I know, for example, I know Terry, the Philippines has a lot of young people working in the environmental sector, and you know, these might be other organizations that you can tap into.
Right, and I would say just one point here on the.
After you.
Sure. So we're going to wrap up the discussion in just another minute or two, and then move into the breakouts. And so I wanted to emphasize on this point because Medha from Nepal also referenced that, you know, a lot of the young people that she works with are really good at working with their fellow peers, making sure that they can do joint advocacy, that they might be really good at educating each other on where to access services. But then when they might get invited to, let's say, USAID's office or to the government's office, it's intimidating. And so my sense is that sometimes young people are perceived as quote unquote unorganized, but in reality, it's more that the pressure has been put on them to present themselves in a certain way or to be highly structured in the way that a government entity or a UN agency would want them to. But in reality, actually, sometimes their way of more flexibly working is also really, is also quite strong. It's just different. So with that, and Chandra, did you,
yes,
small comment, and then we'll jump into
you had asked for examples from developing countries. I posted case studies from Ethiopia, Chile, and England. The point is, in these countries, they're not projects, they're nationwide. And you'll see in these papers that DHS has shown declines. And this to Achwanyo from Sudan, you're right. You know, there is a lot of premarital sexual activity and no governments want to acknowledge it. And so what do you do in a country like South Sudan or India? You can start with sexuality education And in the sexuality education, you can tell young people where they can get condoms. Condoms are available, and condoms can be used by unmarried adolescents. Of course, other methods are useful, but at least you begin there. My message constantly is don't get paralyzed by the barriers.
So as we attempt to not get paralyzed, you're now going to, in your breakouts, you're going to read through a case study. And the case study you'll see actually has a lot of the complexity that is in most countries in the world. This is the case study. So please do pull that up now so you have it with you when you go into the breakout. But essentially, you'll see there's natural complexity in the situation. But as Chandra said, please don't get paralyzed. Instead, try to think through what this fake country, Loompa Land, could really do to make their commitment stronger. And so we're now going to move into breakouts where we're going to practice thinking through how to take that complexity, not feel paralyzed, but what Loompa Land in this case could really do, and think through how they could better partner with young people, what data and evidence they might be looking to understand better, and then also what interventions and programs they should be really implementing to walk through that. So you might be with me, Kate, Chandra, Nina, Yidnik, Amanda, Oko, or some FP 2030 staff. So I am hoping that you all can join us to walk through this breakout session. So please join the breakout now. You've just received an invite and walk through this example. See you all in the breakout, and you'll be there for 30 minutes.
One member mentioned that was briefly that they have a data measuring tool in form of a scorecard that is being used to measure meaningful youth engagement. And this is aimed at looking at the level of engagement, particularly on AYSRH for the young people. And I think this is one of the great things, one thing that we should add to the commitment process to see to gauge and measure the levels of engagement of young people at different levels, and also include the diverse groups of young people. That's what I wanted to add on to.
That's great. Thank you, Amanda, and Yidnik, and also maybe who contributed in the chat box. Yinye. Others can feel free to add in what they plan to commit to. I know we're running short on time, but it looks like maybe Oyinye, did you want to make one additional comment?
Yes, please, if I may. And I just wanted to flag one of the things that we highlighted in our conversation is the fact that the case study talked about how young people could tell you the benefits of abstinence, but it wasn't being practicalized. So even though you provide that information, so how do we move from just that knowledge to the application of the knowledge or the accessing of services? So that's why I was hoping someone in my group could speak on that, because I think that's an important point as we're thinking about commitments. And we say, yes, there are youth-friendly services and young people are being given this information. How are we communicating that information to them? And what are the social and behavioral norms that need to be changed in order to get them from just knowing to actually applying information? Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's one of the key takeaways I've had is the link between information and services is definitely still getting lost. Anyone else? Any non-young people? We've had a lot of young people tell us the one thing that they're gonna be doing differently, but I'd love, the young people already kind of know what needs to be done differently. So I'd be curious to know if there's someone on the line who's a little older in their years that is going to be doing something differently after today.
Well,
Any braves?
I think this is Ejike.
Hi,
Yes,
Ejike.
Yes, I think someone had mentioned it, but our group, we did mention the fact that for us to be able to get over the barriers, especially the supply side, it's important to integrate services in one in one center. A mother and a child or daughter can be sitting together. What are you here for? Oh, I'm here for a headache, even though she's come to fill her monthly pill. But then the important thing is that from the medical clerk to all the doctors who are going to be taking care of adolescents, there will be a special training for them. So once they show up in front of the clinic, by their age, the medical clerk will transfer them to a specialized clerk who will now go through a pathway within the hospital without anybody knowing that is going on. So this is one of the key things that I think should be highlighted. Thank you.
We look forward to that, Ejike, and Nigeria's commitment. We'll look out for it now. Any final thoughts from anyone? Any other non-youth? Now that we want to hear some takeaways from you all as well.
From my side, I'd like to say that, I'm very happy to keep in touch. And if you reach out to me, I promise to respond to you and communicate with you. By all means, I'm going to post my email address and a link to my website in the chat.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chandra. And Kate's going to have, maybe we can go to that final slide actually, but I think that's also maybe Yasmin, was it, who is speaking? If I remember the voice.
Yeah, Emily, I just wanted to say, I just want to add one thing that I'm taking away, and which we were discussing beforehand as well, is of course having more evidence-based programming around young people and adolescents, which we usually don't have. So having age-specific, the adolescent pregnancy, which are the areas where there is high burden, and in which areas where you need to have more aggressive programs and more active monitoring to see that the programs are reaching out to the young people. So I think we need some of the things that need to be sharpened the lens around data and around, programming around that to reach to young people.
That's great. So Yasmin in Pakistan will be working on sharpening her tools to make sure that Pakistan's commitment is really strong. Is there someone else? Sorry.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
So this is Salama Tufuta from Ghana.
Hello.
I think one of the things we can also do is to look at pre-service education for health workers. How much of adolescent and youth health programming content do they have in the curriculum? Because I think so far our focus has been on in-service, so refreshing health workers who are already in the field, and then every year there's a whole bunch that comes out from school into the service, and they are fresh. They really don't have much information on how to handle and work and engage adolescents. So I think that looking at pre-service, including adolescent and young people's issues in our curriculum, and really advocating for it to be examinable, then we can have health workers really being well equipped to engage young people by the time they come out from school. So this is just what I want to add.
I think that's an excellent point, Salamatu. And actually, you're singing Kate's favorite intervention. So if you are interested in that for Ghana, I think Kate would be very interested in seeing how we could possibly help to connect you. Kate, did you want to just give some next steps here so people know how to follow up?
Yep, and thank you for saying that, Salamantu. That's been a song I've been singing for the last 10 years. Is we just keep doing in services. And if you do pre-service training, this is actually the demographic you're trying to reach. These are young people themselves. So if we can better prepare these young students as they're coming at it to become doctors, to be intentional and prepared to serve young people, I think that can really be a sea change. So. Thank you so much. The one I also wanted to make in our small group, we talked a lot about mapping and getting out and trying to get a lay of the land. where young youth-led organizations and youth-serving organizations are, so we can get out of the capitals and get out to talk to some of these more vulnerable young people, like married adolescents, like young people who aren't in school. So really trying to broaden where we're collecting information from to have a, to paint a more robust picture of young people, to understand how to better make a commitment. So very quickly, moving on, we are here to work with you around developing your commitment. So it is indeed strong, it's bold, and it's transformative. A couple of things we're planning on doing in the next few months is we will be setting up office hours. So if individual countries would like to speak with myself and Emily and others in more detail to work through particular issues around commitments, we are here. This is what we really want to do with you for the next several months, is to be available to help you think through some of these challenges. We've talked about this in numerous occasions, but the World Health Organization, as Chandra was saying, there's this Bill and Melinda Gates funded technical assistance mechanism, and countries can solicit support from WHO in developing their commitments. And so there's a process that you go through in terms of submitting a request, and then WHO reviews and can come back to you. So this is also an alternative for you if you're really looking for some more in-depth support around making a really strong commitment. And of course, the guidance is up on our website, and some supportive resources will help you to implement or to operationalize aspects of the guidance. And we've got some of those resources up on the website as well. So there's the WHO data resources. There's a training package that was developed by Restless Develop a number of years ago about working with training adults to work better with young people, so that when young people, so when we're out there soliciting young people's input, that we are listening to them and we're working in partnership with young people. Take advantage there. Like I said, we've been working in this field for 25 years. There's been evidence reviews. There's lots of things out there that can really help you to make a very strong commitment. And we are here to help you find those resources. And again, this is what we want to do, is make these commitments strong and actionable. Emily's put up our contact information there. Chandra has shared his contact information. Just really looking forward to working with you all in the next few months around strengthening these commitments. And Chandra, did you have any final things to say? You're always our inspirational guy. So
no, for me, it's to congratulate you for what you've done. I mean, for me, I constantly say that what FP 2020 did to try to get meaningful participation of young people in consultative processes and meetings took this to another level. And we look forward very much to building on this in 2030. Lots of love, Kate, lots of love. Nina, Emily, bye everyone.
Bye, and Nina,
Argentina, stay safe in India, stay safe everyone.
Thank you
Nina,
very
any
much.
final reflections before we sign off?
Not really, but I would, if anyone in the group or any other country that would like to talk about how to engage with young people if they're in trouble, to connect with young people in their country, it is possible to communicate with me as well. And I can as well give them contacts to other youth focal points, other organizations that we've, or there's always a way that you can communicate and get to work with young people.
Exactly.
Anywhere in the world. So yeah, that's with me.
Perfect. So essentially the message is, we're here for you to help you think through this. Let us know what your challenges are. We guarantee that between myself, Nina, Chandra, and Kate, we can find the right person, the right tool, and maybe even some resources through the TA mechanism to help you solve the challenges ahead. So with that, thank you all very much. Do lean on us. We look forward to being in touch with all of you over the coming months. Stay well and safe.
Bye, everyone.